ready at 18 to see what the rest of our life should be like. With the LLM degree, majority of the states in America will not let you sit for the bar exam because once it's public, it's everywhere.
Right.
It can go anywhere. It can be used by any company in any way because sometimes they take your reels and they use it to for their own monetary gains. Lawyer, I would say that every lawyer is not a shark and they are not out there to get you.
Yes. Welcome Kasakai Game Show. I hope all of you are would be in Mazama and welcome to another episode of The Girl Next Door जहां हम बातें करते हैं दिल से दिल तक. And this is the place where we share stories and celebrate life. I'm your host and host Sneha Kashyap Thakur yet again with another episode of a trailblazing woman here in Austin, Texas. And I am so excited to welcome her and share her story and some amazing topics with her on this episode today. अगर आपने अभी तक हमें सब्सक्राइब फॉलो और लाइक नहीं किया है तो प्लीज गो हेड ऑन यूट्यूब एंड फॉलो अस एट दी गर्ल नेक्स्ट डोर. वी आर ऑल्सो ऑन इंस्टाग्राम वेयर वी शेयर BTS snippets from these episodes every week. So do give us a follow on Instagram as well. Now let's talk about our guest. Today we are going to welcome an attorney who has been practicing in the United States, and she specializes in intellectual property, commercial contract negotiation, and privacy and data protection. She's a mom of two beautiful kids, a brilliant wife, and an amazing, well read attorney who has worked with a major social media company. Please join hands to welcome Paruda Kothari. How have you been?
I've been good, Sneha.
And
Austin has been exciting.
Austin has been
Yes.
exciting. And I would like to share to all our viewers that Paruda is not just an attorney who has been working professionally as an attorney. She has also been volunteering with IDEA as our legal advisor. And IDEA is a 501c3 organization. We have talked about it so many times. And Paruda has been volunteering with us for the last 6 months.
Yes.
Last 6 months now.
Yes.
Yeah. And she also drafts our council reviews every month. This is a monthly newsletter we have started. We started, I think, last month to educate South Asian women here in the USA.
That's good.
What do you feel about that? How do you feel? What do you think about educating South Asian women on legal matters here in USA?
I personally feel it's really, really important, in general, having a basic know how
Mhm.
of the legal framework is important for all of us under any scenario.
Right.
For South Asian women, I think it's not only important, but this is also something which is needed
Mhm.
because the biggest challenge that, as you might have also noticed, that
Mhm.
a lot of South Asian women do not keep up to date with what is going on in the legal scenario
Yeah.
until a situation happens where they need legal help.
Yes.
And at that time, it's often a problem because they don't know how to begin
Right.
and where to go.
Mhm.
So I definitely feel that it's very personally, it has been a very rewarding experience for me. And yes, I do feel that, there is a need. But I see more and more women leaning towards it now. They want to learn, they want to educate themselves, which
Yes.
is really great.
Could tell us, our audience, about who you are, where you grew up, how did you took up law as a career? Because I know there is an interesting story behind it.
So I grew up in India. I grew up in Jaipur. That's where I completed my high schooling from. And I just knew that when I was in India, I knew that I did not want to be an engineer or a doctor. Those were the fields I was far away from. But then what? Because, when you grow up in the 90s, especially like someone like me, those were the most popular paths that
Hmm.
everybody around me was taking. And there was little to no direction as to what else I can do with my life. I knew that, it has to be something from the field of arts. So, having an inclination towards the creative side, I decided to dabble into the world of fashion designing. And I had I was very fortunate to have really, really supporting family. My parents sent me to Toronto.
Mhm.
I did my undergrad in fashion designing from over from there, and later on I moved to Florida to complete my bachelor's.
And you studied in some really fancy school.
Yeah, it was a private art college,
Yeah.
in downtown TO. So yeah, a lot. The fashion scene was strong,
No,
and
not in Toronto. I think
in India.
in India. Yes.
Yeah, so in India, actually, I went to, and I'm very proud that I could be, I was fortunate enough to attend Maharani Gayatri Devi's
Yes.
school.
Yes.
And I think a big part of who I am today was the foundation, that I was able to build over there. A lot of people would question me or say, hey, you know what, you have been in an all girls school, and so probably you don't know how to talk to boys.
Mm.
And I would tell them, and it's not true, I don't suggest it, but I would always tell them that, you know what, maybe that was the reason I was not so much focused on boys, but about building my own personality.
Right.
And again, it's not true. You can go to a co-educational school and do excellent. You learn communication, you learn to survive.
Yeah, you're saying
And
the vice versa is not true.
exactly,
Yeah.
totally. And then, in a girls' school, also sometimes, there could be situations that might not be that friendly. But I was really fortunate that the school and the teachers that we had at that time, the environment that I was a part of, that really put a lot of emphasis on being a proud feminist, and understanding why it's important for women to stand on their 2 feet, to be of sound knowledge in mind, and to be strong individuals in general.
Right.
So for which I'm very grateful. And so yeah, and that led me to Toronto.
Mhm.
I went to fashion school. While I was in fashion school, I started realizing that this world of fashion and media is emerging.
Hmm.
So after finishing my bachelor's, I went to Michigan State University to earn a master's in public relations because I wanted to work in fashion media. um, or because at that time the concept of social media was not there, so I
Right.
knew I want to work in some kind of a media field, not necessarily make clothes, but work something around, which is again on the creative side.
Hmm.
So what, and I think once being alone, being on my own, gave me that, the mind and the wings, that opportunity, the window, I would say, that I could see further, that okay, this is not it, what more can we do. And that was the time when I was at Michigan State. I started working with for a project. I was working for substance abuse teens, and then I realized the importance of law and order, and how much, what a important role, a vital role that it plays
Right.
for them. And I was also fortunate enough to meet some law students,
Hmm.
and that got me thinking that why not law school, why not just do it. And
So from fashion to law
yeah,
school, it's a very unusual move,
yes.
right? Because it's you're on the creative side of the world, and now you're moving into more rational side of the world. What made you do that?
Just cause I think I just found my calling. So I think it has also something to do with my mother and father back home. They were involved in in major work, or their career surrounded, or was focused towards public good in some way,
Mhm.
working for the society, seeing what social causes need help and what they can do to do that. My dad, who used to be a bank executive, once he retired from his banking job, he also went on to practicing law full time as a human rights attorney.
Mhm.
And I would go and talk to him, and then I thought that sometimes we are not ready at 18 to see what the rest of our life should be like. And it's a huge burden on a teenager to decide now how you want rest of your career to look like.
Hmm.
Sometimes it just takes a lot of work and time, and and personal growth to realize what you
What you
want to
really want to
do.
do.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I also wanted to still stay towards the creative side, not only just being in law. And that was the reason why I ended up, after law school, why I ended up working towards all these social media companies, because I was in copyright and I got to work with so many artists. And that would, give me that creative fix, that I could see how things are being created, how I, as a legal professional, can do better to protect this work, what I can do. So a part of me really felt. Uh,
So there was a common
Yes.
connection you found, and then
Definitely.
that kind of motivated you to pursue this field.
Yes.
So you did your masters in PR, and
Yes.
then you again went to the law school.
Yes.
So where did you go do that?
I went to Indiana University's Indianapolis location.
Boilermaker. Are you a Boilermaker?
I'm a Hoosier.
Oh,
You
you're a
are a
Hoosier.
Boilermaker.
I'm a Boilermaker.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So you went to Indiana University to pursue your masters again.
Yes.
So you're a double masters.
Yes. So actually, in law, we call it Juris Doctor. So I have a
Okay.
doctorate in law.
Okay.
So I have a master's and a doctorate because it's the law school starts from the most important degree you can get as an attorney here is called the Juris Doctor.
Okay.
So I'm a JD.
Oh wow. Oh wow. So can a Juris Doctor also become a judge?
Oh yes, because so the path to law school is you need to have your bachelor's degree
Right.
in any field of your liking. It
Mhm.
doesn't have to be pre-law, and once you complete that, then you have to take your LSAT exam,
Mhm.
and once you get the required scores, you apply to law school, and then you take admission or you are granted admission in a 3-year program called the Juris Doctor. And after that, you can choose if you need to do a LLM, which a lot of international students do. But if
Mhm.
you have gone to law school here, you have gotten a JD, then it totally depends upon where your career path is. And yes, judgeship is always a path further from there.
So any South Asian person, or basically I'm talking about the immigrants who are not citizen of United States and who have not done their bachelor's in law
Yes.
in United States. What would be the path for them? Can they go and write LSAT and directly take admission in LLM, or do they need to have a bachelor's degree in do they need to have a LLB in United States, and then only they can practice as a lawyer in the States?
So a foreign born student, like India, for example.
Right.
So basically, if they want to do LLM, LSAT is not a requirement for LLM, as
Okay.
far as I'm aware.
Okay.
You just need to apply for the program and you get into the program.
Mm-hmm.
But LLM is considered a master's.
Got it.
Now, with the LLM degree, majority of the states in America will not let you sit for the bar exam.
Mhm.
Last I knew, only California and New York were permitting it. And LLM on its own would not hold that much value. Personally speaking, it's not an advice in any capacity because
Mhm.
students have done LLM and they have done amazing things. But yes, definitely, if you go through the JD route, then it brings itself that kind of security that you can literally go to any state, you can take the bar exam, and you can practice. Versus LLM limits you to taking the bar for New York and California only, as far as I'm aware. Maybe 1 or 2 more states are part of it now.
Got it.
And also sometimes they really look at it what your overall profile is, like if you are one of the topmost schools in India,
Mm-hmm.
highly regarded, and you have worked extensively over there, you can do an LLM here and get great opportunities. Otherwise it can be sometimes challenging. But yeah, if you have done a bachelor's in India, so they look at 16 years of education before your, because bachelor's here is 4 years
Right.
course in general. So if you have done, for example, just 3 years of bachelor,
Mhm.
you can go and talk to the university that can you do like a year of extra credit work, for example, with that count towards your 16 years, and while you prepare for your JD, and then you can take your LSAT, you can go for the 3-year JD route, and then it's a lot more simpler, the
So
process.
people who do LLB in India, most of them have a 5-year course degree.
BLLB, yeah.
BLLB, right? Which is a 5-year course.
Yes.
So once you do that 5-year course, and you have worked as a, say, lawyer or attorney in India,
Yes.
or in any of the South Asian countries,
Yes.
And you want to come here and practice law, what is the route? Do you know about that?
So the route would be, you come here. I think usually either you need to work under a lawyer or a judge for some time.
Mhm.
Each state has its different requirements. Again, sorry, I would not go to each state. I would go to California, New York, that I am aware of. So in California, if you have not been to law school here, but I think in California that applies to if you have not been to law school at all.
Mhm.
If you have gone to law school in India and you want to directly work here, then I think you will have to definitely talk to the county you are in, or the state bar association. You have to talk to them to see what the specific requirements are for you.
Hmm.
So if you have done your BLLB over there, either some of them take like the LLM route we talk about. and you say, okay, I don't even want to do that, then you definitely have to start preparing for the California bar exam. And in addition to that, get in touch with the state bar right away. Talk to them that this is what my credentials are. I have so and so work experience already, under my belt. Then they will tell you whether you need to work with a local judge or under a lawyer, you need an apprenticeship,
Got
or
it.
you don't need it at all, because rules and law, they keep changing.
So again, we are trying to break a myth here. A lot of people say that if you have a BLLB degree in any of the South Asian nations, you cannot practice law in the states. That's not true. Like you have to find out. There are ways in which
Yes.
you can, go for a higher education here or work with a judge or a lawyer, and then get your credentials approved by the bar association. And each state has a different rule. So if you have been a lawyer in any of the South Asian countries, and if you want to practice law, what we are suggesting is that you can explore options. There are ways you can
Oh, yes,
explore.
definitely. We have foreign trained lawyers all the time who come over here. Um, Personally, since my interaction with them was through the law school, so I would often see them in LLM courses.
Right.
So that's the reason I'm aware of that. But first thing they were told is talk to the state bar. But definitely be prepared, because first of all, it won't be every state that you can practice in, and some states would not transfer your or waive you in your license. Like if you're licensed in California, but if you have not been educated in US, then there are separate rules and requirements regarding that. So that's when things can get complicated.
Right.
But there are always ways around it. There are always ways to achieve what you want. And if you really want to practice in USA as an attorney and don't want to go to school here, I'm sure, just like it takes a little bit of like talking and finding out and making right connections and then figuring it out from there.
Your career has been very, very demanding, and you have been a mom of two kids. You have also been a wife. You have been married, and managing family, managing this demanding career. How has it all been? Like, what do people generally tell you, or what has been your take towards the life when you hear any comments, like anything unusual which you hear a lot of people say when they see you in this field and juggling between your career and family life?
I think before I decided to, or while I was deciding to become an attorney or go to law school, that was the time, when what I would hear would sound unusual to me, because the environment I came from, I was taught that anybody should aspire to be whatever they want to be. They can achieve everything they want. But yes, there were people who would often wonder that what, you have a 2-year-old child, so how do you plan to go to law school with him, in tow, or what is the plan, or why do you need to in the first place? So oftentimes, this question is put, and not only from me. I think as a woman, so many other women can relate. You found yourself a working husband, so what is the requirement or need anymore to go out and do all this? And my question would, or the question I would ask them back, that would you be asking this from a man
Right.
at any point? So when it comes to juggling things, it's the same thing, it's not about a man or a woman, it's about being a human being and what their wants, wishes, and will is, about where they want to be in life.
Right.
If you're happy being a homemaker, be a homemaker by all means. And it's a beautiful thing. If you can be around your children, take care of your family, and if it gives you fulfillment. In my case, I always saw myself who wanted to go out and do it all. And I still believe in it, that, I feel like, okay, I still have so much that I want to accomplish too. And what is the way? The way is communicating.
Right.
The practical thing is, yes, you can dream and wish, but until you communicate, until you are sure yourself, first of all, that what, I want it, nothing can stop me. And then you communicate the same to your partner, family, whoever is around you, that this is my plan, I am doing it. And if I have children, again, fortunate enough to have a very supporting partner, and also over years to make them understand, if I need to do this, why I need to do this.
Do this, yeah.
So I was lucky enough to get a lot of help, but I also feel that I was always sure enough as to what I want and how I'm going to go after it.
And so you had a plan in mind, and
Yes.
I think it's a fair question to ask everybody, like not just women. I think we should be asking this question to men as well. That how are you managing your career and your family home? And because
Right.
I think both men and women as of today are actually balancing their career and family life.
Exactly.
Both are equally partnering at home and
Yes.
also in their workplaces.
Yeah.
So if we are not asking these questions to men, we should be.
Yes.
Right. Let's change gears a little bit.
Okay.
And I think we talked a little bit about you and where you come from. I want our audience to get a little educated today.
Sure.
And I was thinking that we will talk a little bit about data privacy, intellectual contracts. How do what does it mean in today's world when AI is actually driving the world crazy?
Yes.
How is everything gonna function, right? So my first question to you is, like, you specialize in intellectual properties and contract managements and making sure that the negotiation happens and privacy and data protection. Can you tell all of us a little bit more about, like, what is the role of a lawyer or an attorney in this space? Like, what do they do? What is your day to day looks like, and what are some of the key things you're working on?
Sure. So, just to, as a disclaimer,
Yeah.
I would like to request that kindly don't take it as a legal advice of any kind.
Yes.
I'm strictly speaking as to the work that I'm handling,
Right.
but not providing a legal advice at this time.
Yeah.
Forward, no worries. Moving forward, I am what data privacy lawyer is, and my work is to basically safeguard
Mm.
that when a data is transferred. For example, my client has all this data that they are sharing with another company.
Right.
Maybe they're working to buy some software, and they have a software agreement in place, and they will be providing, in the use of that software, they will be providing their company info, the people who work for them, that information. It could be a medical company of medical devices, and they might be acquiring a software that helps them keep a tab of different medications they're using, for example.
Right.
Or a media company, for example. All these different clients, they have, and then they have these vendors that provide services. Now, when I'm contracting with a vendor, I need to make sure that all the personally identifiable information, we call it PII means that if I give it to you, you exactly know who this human being is, where they live, what they have. You might have access to their bank information,
Oh, wow.
their health information, extremely sensitive information, and you have to process that. So, going back, we use two terms, a data controller and a data processor. Now, my client would be a data controller. It's giving all this personal information during the use of the software of their vendor.
So basically, a
Yeah.
data controller is a company or an individual which controls the data
Controls
of
the
other
data.
other people.
Yes, it could be their clients,
Okay.
it could be their employees.
Mm-hmm.
So, all the data that they are responsible for, how this data will be used.
Got it.
Now, they have to give this data during the course of using so and so software, or, to the vendor.
And what was the other term you said? Data
Processor. Now,
processor.
your data vendor is your data processor,
Okay.
because they are processing that data.
Okay.
They can be putting all this information, into their system.
Can you explain this in a little more simplified
Layman terms.
Yeah,
Okay.
layman terms.
Let's do that. So, think of me as a data controller, and I have this company, and hypothetically speaking, you are my employee.
Okay.
Now, you come to me and you tell me that, you know what, we have subscription to so and so spa.
Okay.
The company provides me with facility that I can fill a form on the website and I can ask for their services at discounted rate. Now you are giving your information, so you are with me. All your information is in my system. I am the controller. I have your personal information as an employee, the stuff I needed on my file. I provide that information to the spa that, you know what, Sneha will come for a full, hydrofacial body massage.
Oh, yes.
Yes, give her the whole treatment.
Yes.
And this is how we can give her the discount. Now, spa will collect your information. They might collect the banking information if you are going through my company on my behalf. Now, their responsibility will be to process that information and to keep it very safe.
So in this scenario, you are the
I
data
am the
controller,
controller,
and the spa is the
is the
processor.
processor. Um, and if this spy example is not working, somebody comes to you, a software service. You need, that I want a dictation software like some Dragon or those programs we have that somebody can take the dictation. I want to buy your software from that company. I have 2,000 employees in my company. They will be using your dictation software to use on our system. Now, when we are installing that, we will be putting information that they will be processing, that these 2,000 people, this is their information, the dictation they are taking. Meanwhile, what data is exchanged? Are they using any financial information to give it to us, or it's only personal information? Maybe it's nothing. So, any information that you give to anybody else to process on your behalf, that person is a processor.
Got it.
You are the owner, or the controller of that information. That is your information. So, you will be telling them that, hey, we want only this much. Nobody else can breach into the system. If they do, if there's a data breach, this is your responsibility how you will be providing notice. This will be our responsibility how we will be providing notice to our employees or people affected by it. And also, what kind of other mechanisms you have in place.
So when a data is lost, when the PII gets lost, it's like people. There are always data leaks that happens.
Yes.
Who is actually responsible for that? The processor or the controller?
That's a very good question. That's also a very complicated question. So a lot of it, as a lawyer would always say, it depends. Lot of the times we would like to say it's the processor, because somewhere in their data security program or their contracts with third party vendors, for example, they have sub processors who are helping them do that. What kind of security protocol mechanism is in place? But then, again, the question is, controller also has their own responsibility. Because as a controller, I have to make sure that I have all these protocols. I know when to provide notice. I am keeping a tab on you. I am making sure an audit is being, conducted. And yearly audit to see if you are on par with what is needed, to protect my data. So I think it goes, it applies to both in some way or the other. Also, the most important thing is it in compliance with the data privacy laws and regulations of the country that you're operating in? Is this data going outside? So sometimes,
the data residency thing.
Yeah, the data residency, very good. So, like I am sitting over here, and I can send you an email and send you all my information and you can receive it. But then, probably all the data is getting stored in a server in Ukraine somewhere. Now you have to know that that is flowing. So the laws of that country will also come into place.
Right.
So these are the things that, one has to be mindful of. These are the laws and regulations that I have to read day to day. And then when I'm writing a data privacy agreement, or if I'm writing an amendment, I have to go over, what countries' laws will be applied, how they will be applied. And if there's a breach, what are the things that, my client has to keep in mind, and the responsibilities of the vendor in that case.
Yeah. So I worked for a software as a SaaS basically software as a service company before, and there I was the product manager or on the data residency side. So when this entire European leak thing came up and people were very considerate about where their data is actually residing, I established a set of security measures in the company for our product. Like there has to be a 90-day deletion policy. This is the time we can hold the customer's data.
Yes.
We cannot have data in US of European customers after this functionality has been delivered and they have used it. So there were a lot of those things which we had to take care of, and that's why it's a field which really interests me a lot. Tell me a little bit more. Like now, with after COVID, after the pandemic hit, the way of working has changed a lot these days, right?
Absolutely.
And this entire set of data privacy, data residency, intellectual property rights, having contract negotiations, these are more corporate terms, but they also apply to individuals, right? So in the remote working setting, right? Which is the norm these days. How do you make sure that you maintain confidentiality and data security in this virtual environment? Like, what do you do to do that?
So I would say, you know, it's contract, contract, contract.
Hmm.
A lot of research and background work that we do. NDAs, for example,
Hmm.
non-disclosure agreements.
Right.
How do you keep confidential, information confidential? So
Hmm.
there are so many rules and regulations. I think they are ever evolving, ever growing.
Hmm.
And I think beyond the pandemic also now, even if we sit in an office, the way the world is shrinking
Right.
and everybody is working in every other corner of the world,
Yep.
and they're all working towards maybe a same goal, a common organization, same work. So the data flow has around the globe, the way it's traveling now, it's like never before.
Hmm.
Because even if physical offices come back, we are still not going to be doing the whole, pen and paper thing and just giving that
Yeah,
document
everything
that
is on
this
the
is a
cloud.
file. Everything is on the cloud. So with that, the most important thing that I cannot emphasize enough on is make sure what all and the simplest way, make sure where your data is going, what all countries it is flowing through, what are the rules and regulations of all these places.
How do somebody know that where their data is flowing through?
So in companies we have data privacy offices.
Uh-huh.
We have very secure data protection mechanisms in place.
Mhm.
So whenever a contract is created, that's where I come into play. I say, okay, now you are giving this information to this person. So we have a checklist, according to the rules and regulations, for example, of GDPR,
Hmm.
the Global Data Privacy Regulations.
Yep.
We tell them that, okay, first, there is a category of data that we list. What all data is being transferred
Hmm.
to your vendor, for example. So, different categories of data, then, it helps you determine whether it's personal information at all, personally identifiable information, sorry, or not.
Hmm.
So sometimes an information can be just confidential information, but it's not personally identifiable information.
Yeah.
Sometimes, information can be encrypted or anonymized, and nobody can put it back together to say that, okay, this is this person and this is whom it belongs to.
Hmm.
So a lot of data privacy rules revolve around that,
Hmm.
The what is the first definition of data privacy that came in 1897, I believe, was the freedom to be left alone or the freedom to be let alone.
Hmm.
So that's what data privacy is with
Hmm.
regards to a human being or an organization.
Hmm.
So first thing we do is, what a data privacy officer or data privacy attorney we do is we talk to the team. We go over the contract.
Hmm.
We see what data privacy rules and regulations, come into play
Come into
in
play.
this context.
Hmm.
Have a team wide meeting or talk to the right team that can tell you the category of data that will be transferred. Then in this also, there is some really sensitive categories. Then over there again, there are separate rules and regulations for them.
Mhm.
And then you ask them, okay, where your clients are, where all they are situated. And on the basis of that, once the company provides you all that information, then it is when you draft a data privacy agreement.
Right.
So that the job is to safeguard, to find out and to safeguard. And that's what I do, like a gatekeeper.
Got it. But so this is your role. Now
Yes.
I'm going back a little bit from
Okay.
the time when the data is being led by a person to be controlled. So for example, if I am an employee of certain company, or if I'm just googling and browsing and
Yes.
looking at things, every time you go and sign up on some account, you are asked for a cookies. There
Yeah.
are marketing cookies, there are
Yes.
technical functional cookies, and then there are promotional cookies, and then there are mandatory cookies,
Right.
which you cannot ignore. Like you can toggle down everything else, but
Yeah.
you have to accept those mandatory ones.
True.
When I'm doing that, I don't know to which country my data is flowing.
Yes.
I don't know where the data centers of these companies are.
Yes.
Because as a layman, you would not go and research on those things.
Right.
So, what would be the first step you would say for a person like who's working remotely and working for a company, or even when they are browsing? What is that one thing that they should keep in mind when they are filling out those details?
I would always say that these security protocols. There is a list of security protocol, that you can look up. If you're not able to find, ask chat gpt now. We have
Yes.
AI in place. So go and see that, okay, because if you're using your work computer,
Mhm.
more and more companies now, my law firm included, and my previous companies also, they put all these security protocols on your system,
Mhm.
and you go through their remote desktop model now.
Hmm.
So most of these places actually monitor and
Hmm.
have these self monitoring safeguards in place.
Hmm.
That is very, very important for a company to do if the employees are, planning to use a work laptop
Mhm.
for personal use.
Hmm.
So first thing would be, do not do that. Please don't use your work laptop, as your in-person entertainment system, I would say, because
Oh my God, I have been doing that all my life.
so, and
I'm not
if,
using the same browser, but I know
yes,
that even from the other browser, they can actually see your data because it's
right.
being remotely managed.
Yes. So yeah, so I think companies are becoming sharper and sharper in that regard. They're already putting those things in place. They are monitoring you, and they come and tell you, hey, this is not allowed. And sometimes you're not even able to access the websites.
Hmm.
And apart from that, when these cookies come, take your time to go over, because some of them, what we call is automatic consent.
Hmm.
Then one thing is opt in consent, and one is opt out consent
Hmm.
when it comes to acknowledgement
Hmm.
with whether you agree or not.
Hmm.
So, opt in consent is when you specifically say, I agree to the terms and conditions. And we always agree to them without reading what they are even saying.
Hmm.
So, what I would tell people, and one advice I would give, not only as an attorney, but as an aware individual, if you think you are about to share sensitive information, take 5 minutes and read that agreement, what it says
Yeah.
when it's asking for consent.
And when you say sensitive information, what is categorized as sensitive information?
One common example would be your personal information.
Like your health
Your
information, your
health
SSN
information.
details,
Yes.
your national ID details,
Your
basically
bank
bank
account.
details, financial details.
Financial details, people save bank cards, the amount of people that save their bank info in their browsers. Are you one of them, Sneha? That is so dangerous. Check your passwords. Keep different passwords, write them down somewhere physically, and keep it aside, and change your passwords every 3 months.
But I use Chrome and it says that it provides some enhanced encryption on my bank
Which is
details.
amazing. And and I would not like to make any official comment about Google and their policies to safeguard personal data, but we live in a world where this is a very real possibility. Everything is great and safe unless it happens to you.
Okay. I think I think the first thing I'm gonna do after this podcast is that I'm gonna get rid of those bank details which I've actually saved on my browser because
Yes,
I do it. It's ease.
it's easy.
After a point of time, you want to just have that ease in your life,
Yes,
right? That because we talked about consent and we talked about opt in and opt out and automatic consent.
yes,
That brings me to my next question, which is, this is a hot topic, having user consent, right?
yes.
And with the kind of data flow that's happening across apps and services, what are like what do you think, like what in your opinion would you say to the companies or advise the companies to insert big and small to ensure that they are obtaining and managing consent effectively under the current and future laws?
So when it comes to companies, maintaining the consent under current and future laws, ever evolving laws, I would say that first of all, be very clear in your language.
Hmm.
Talk about it, like a very concise, clear language, providing enough information why consent is necessary,
Hmm.
what is the need for it,
Hmm.
why it is required. Always have, what do we call, like in legal terms, we use this term called layered notice.
Hmm.
Means sometimes people don't want to go over a very detailed document.
So layered notice is basically a long notice and it has layering in between.
Yes. So
And as a layman, you'll not be able to figure out like
So-
how each word is actually changing.
yeah, so I'll so what layered notice is basically, I would say, revert back. Layered notice is a basic explanation of the notice, what this notice contains,
Hmm.
in very simple terms. And then when you click on it, it will show you the whole notice. But that first part of it will explain enough that, okay, now I get the idea of it. So for companies, I would say I would recommend in favor of having these layered notices in place, because very few people, nobody will come and say that, hey, we read that 4-page consent letter and it was amazing. And now we agree or not. Right?
Yes, yes.
So
You
have
don't have
that
that
in
much of
place.
time.
Have
Yeah.
very plain and simple language.
Hmm.
Tell them clearly why it's important and what is the need. And I would also say that we talked about opt-in. Opt-in consent is always better than opt-out. What opt-out is? Opt-out is I'm choosing not to be a part of this. But if you don't click that box after 10 pages of documentation, which a lot of people would not even reach there, right?
Right.
And then automatically consent is registered.
Yeah.
And which is, could be a risky situation.
But for companies, it's going to be beneficial. For the person, it is going to be risky.
But for companies also, because they earn a poor name,
Oh.
if they have just taken consent and now they're using your data in some way or the other, tomorrow it might bite back. Consumers might come, hey, we don't remember providing consent. You did this, but that was deceptive practices, like we say.
So you can actually go ahead and say this to the company, like if they have some deceptive practices.
Like if a consumer is getting harmed, they did not give consent to use I do not give consent to a daycare to use my 2-year-old's photographs without my permission. Now I am doing, that opt in, that, okay, I give consent that my daughter's images can be used on this public forum. Now I have checked the mark. So this is, I'm opting in. But with opt out, I give consent unless I opt out of it. Now, if I haven't read it, by mistake, I forget to click it. I have done, I agree. So then, they automatically have. And tomorrow, if that image is misused, and with all the AI and the photoshopping and everything that goes on in the world, I would be like, oh my goodness, this has caused me irreparable harm because of so and so company. So, there lies the risk.
Yeah. What do you think? Like you talked about AI and all these all the kind of things that are happening today, not just with image but with audio, video, everything. Do you have any perspective around that? What do you think when you see it from the legal perspective?
From a legal perspective, I would say, or even from let's start with the layman's perspective.
Yes.
That's where my limited
as a
knowledge.
layman, I'm scared.
Yes.
I'm scared to put out anything out there because I don't know when my image or my audio or my video will be converted into what. And nowadays, technology is advanced so much that you just cannot figure out whether it's the person talking or whether
Right.
it's the AI talking or doing the things. We have heard so many frauds that has
Yes.
happened because of that. So what do you have to say about that?
So I would say, as an individual, this brings me back to the start of this conversation, that why it's really important to protect your data. Your image is also, your data. When, we are downloading these apps, we just click on it. Hey, it's so much fun to see myself age 40 years, and, somebody sitting in China, is controlling that. They're aging you also. And, they could be mishandling your information that would anyways age you much faster than you would like to.
Yeah.
If you go through that stress in real life.
Right.
So I would say, please read, educate yourself. If you're using any app, see
But
what
social media has become a thing, Paruda. I mean, you cannot just like it's become such a thing that it has become part of life. It's not an
Yes.
option anymore.
True.
People want to be on Instagram, people want to be on Facebook, people want to be in all sorts of social content creation apps. They are doing things because this is the new norm. People are making money out of it. So you cannot stop yourself from putting you out there in front of
Right.
the world. But are there some intricacies or minute things you can do on these apps to protect your information?
Very simply, like we all love to upload pictures on Facebook. I do too. Instagram, of
Yeah.
course. So first thing is, be very sure if you want your information to be public or private. Because once it's public, it's everywhere.
Right.
It can go anywhere.
Right.
It can be used by any company in any way, because sometimes they take your reels and they use it for their own monetary gains.
Yeah, absolutely.
So once you're putting yourself out there, number one, you have already, submitted yourself to that risk.
Hmm.
I would say that now, whether it comes to pictures or videos, there are many kinds of softwares, that mark your images in certain way that they cannot be used or copied, or even a screenshot could be taken. So read about that. See what are the best ways, There are specialists who have provided tons of information, over the internet. They tell you what kind of watermark, for example, you can use. If you don't want to use watermark, what kind of encryption is in place.
Hmm.
So many companies, many websites, you can't even take a screenshot today, because the moment you take a screenshot with your phone, it will not translate into the same when you look at it later on. So protect your material. It's hard, it's very, very difficult, and that's why it's all the more reason to be vigilant.
Hmm.
What you're sharing also, if you're sharing your photograph, what setting have you taken it in,
Hmm.
where you
Like
are.
sometimes you go ahead and add the location and everything.
Yes.
That's kind of
How public you are making yourself publicly accessible.
yeah.
And also, if you don't want people to have access to your home to see where you are living, if it's a public image, don't take it in a place where you don't want people to come in.
Hmm.
You can go out somewhere. But again, try, not to put too much personal information out there where you can be accessed, and where somebody would just know, how to. You don't make yourself so much vulnerable. It's a part of life, we can't escape it. That risk is always there.
Hmm.
But read up on safeguarding mechanisms. If you must share, there are so many ways now to protect this information as well. So that is gaining knowledge, staying
Got it.
educated, and on top of it, not to feel that, what, I'm just too tired right now to put this one thing in place. I've just shared 100 pictures.
Hmm.
Like,
Take that first
yeah,
step.
yes,
Be
aware.
aware about it, right? That's the right word. So I want to go back to the previous question
Okay.
where we were talking about the opt-in thing. So you said that user consent companies need to be mindful of taking user consent, and opt-in is something which you recommend.
Yes.
Got it.
Very personal recommendation only.
Yeah.
But definitely, I feel that somewhere forces the reader of that agreement to go over it.
Yeah.
Before they make a choice, and then we can tell them that, hey, you read it and then you chose it.
Yeah. So we talked about user consent, and we talked about how the entire world is going public on the social media platforms,
Yes.
and we talked about watermarks. So I'm bringing this conversation a little bit deeper into
Okay.
emojis, right? There is a. Do you think we'll ever see a day where emoji based contracts are going to be legally binding? And if so, what's the perfect emoji for a confidentiality agreement?
So I would say never. With the way the world is going,
Yeah.
none of us saw it coming. We
Yes.
never saw VR, and people would be throwing punches in the air because they are wearing a pair of glasses. So anything can happen. Long back, once upon a time, a thumbprint was enough
Yeah.
to be admitted as a signature
Right.
in court of law.
Right.
Now we have moved, of course, far away from
We
that.
have moved to the digital signature.
Yes, we have moved to the digital signature. Sometimes, my laptop automatically suggests that, okay, this is a signature I've created for you. Is
Yeah.
it acceptable? And it's just a click for me.
Yeah.
So I'm not even using the mouse pad to write. So why not, it might happen that someday there could be an emoji. For me, the perfect emoji would be the handshake emoji.
Oh, you're getting yes, you're getting a contract.
Yes,
Let's get in a contract.
Yes.
Okay, got it. Yes, this is amazing. Anything else that comes to your mind? Do you think thumbs up would be also a thing? No.
Um, thumbs up could be a very slippery slope situation that I'm agreeing with it, or I'm agreeing to this, or I'm okay with it. It could mean a lot of things. So I would say that somebody might still say, you know what, we want to keep that thumbs up, but I would suggest against it.
Got it. B- Taking that a little forward and
Okay.
taking, stretching it a little bit more. We have all seen movies where AI has taken over the world
Yes.
scenario, right? Do you think we are very close to needing a legal framework for a Terminator scenario?
I would very interesting scenarios, Neha. I
Because
would hope
yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, carry on. You were
No,
saying
no, no, no,
something.
no. Go ahead.
So I would hope that we are not closer to that. That's, my personal wish, because the whole world will be, in a state of panic, like we have never seen before. But yes, definitely AI law is very much, coming into being. It is
Hmm.
already there now.
Yeah.
People are learning more and more. I do hope personally that, someday I get to work into AI law field. I'm definitely exploring myself because it goes hand in hand with data privacy.
Mm-hmm.
So currently I don't have personal knowledge about it. But yes, with AI and the way the world is going, the onset of, the type of robots we have now, anything is possible, because self-thinking robots have arrived last I heard.
Yes.
So you never know.
So, what do you think? Like when a robot, a self-thinking robot, would make a mistake, who would be responsible? The creator, the company who's selling it, the company who's controlling the data of it, the person who's buying it, or the robot itself?
uh, Again, a very good question. So let's start with something small.
Right.
Before we move to robot, we often ask, it's a beautiful picture, it can put Picasso to shame, and it's created by AI.
Yeah.
So now who owns the copyright?
Yeah.
Right. So in that, usually the common knowledge, or what I would like to think, is that who is the creative force behind that picture that AI created? Who gave AI that idea?
Mm.
Who worked over it and who monitored it while the AI was creating that piece of art?
Mm.
And that person could be considered a copyright holder,
Mhm.
as well as the cause of it.
But if,
Right.
if I'm an employee in a company and
Yeah.
I'm creating a software for the AI to create it, who is the owner? The
The
company or
company,
the
if
company?
you are on company time, if you're doing it for the company
Company.
specifically,
Got it.
then, or sometimes there are legal scenarios where you are on company time using company software. You might be doing it for your own personal moonlighting job, or your website.
Mm-hmm.
And this becomes $1 million piece, and the company is like, hey, we have the rights to it, because even though you created it, but you created it on our time and dime.
Okay. So
So
it's basically whose software you're using, who is
Yes.
legally. Got it. Got it. Okay. So when a AI makes mistake in that scenario, it's the company as well. Then it's not the
it
creator.
could be
I
depending
mean, the
upon
company
the
cannot take the all the profits and put the employee under the bus, right?
Yes, and then, again, I would once again say it depends that what kind of, relationship they have with the creator. Is
Yeah.
it an independent creator,
Hmm.
an outside creator,
Hmm.
just working for the company, or it's an official employee of the company? So, again, we have these legal scenarios that we have to think of.
It would be fun to see how the legal dynamics of AI world changes moving forward. Like it would be really nice to see how the legal world comes up with new laws in place and new regulations in place to manage and monitor
Yes.
the AI world of tomorrow.
Absolutely. Like moving to, going back to your robot question, we have these robot dogs now.
Hmm.
And I was looking into getting one, as much as I love the real, fur baby. But sometimes I would feel that it's hard for me to care for a real one with my timing constraint. And my daughter really wanted one. Now, tomorrow, if that robot dog comes and, bite my daughter, then I would be going to the company that, hey, you know what? The dog you created. So, you have the rights to it.
Oh, but would the robot dog actually bite someone?
You never know, right? Because it's a dog. If it can wag its tail, it can bite too.
Oh my God.
I would like to think not.
Yes,
but-
yes. But it's so fascinating
Yes.
that we are in this world, and bringing you back into our intellectual property and data protection side of the world. This is very it's a very significantly complex area, and a lot of people don't understand the concept of intellectual property rights versus how it's tied to contract negotiations, how it's tied to NDAs, how it's tied to the entire data protection and privacy. What are some of the misconceptions you have seen while you have been in this role? Like, what are some of the common misconceptions people have around these topics?
I think with like when it comes to copyrighted material,
Mm-hmm.
people exactly sometimes don't understand if they have the copyright or they don't,
Hmm.
and why not. A common misconception would be, for example, the biggest or the most amount of complaints we would get sometimes, in one of my previous companies would be somebody went on a movie set,
Hmm.
or somebody is on a movie set
Hmm.
and they end up being in the movie.
Hmm.
Now they want to be compensated. They're like, hey, you know what? It's my body, my rules. I did not give consent to be a part of this production. I was walking from the set. I was shot. Now I have the copyright.
So they basically you're saying that they just got into the movie because of some short.
They are
They
just
were not
walking on the street.
okay.
They're walking on the street. There's a shooting going on, a movie shooting,
Mm-hmm.
and they just walk behind the actor unknowingly. Now they end up in that frame. Now they say, you know what? I have a copyright to my image being shown on TV.
Hmm.
Let me be compensated.
Hmm.
So, first question we will ask, was it a closed set or an open set?
Hmm.
Was it out in the public for anybody to walk through?
Hmm.
Or was it, inside a secluded studio where you cannot enter without following proper protocols?
Right.
If it's an open set, were there notices in place? Because most movie sets put notices in place that there's a shooting going on for a movie or a TV show, and you might end up being in it, because if you don't want to be, then stay out. So, what did they, take notice of? So, a lot of time people think, or, Shah Rukh Khan is going on the street. I'm like, I just see him standing and smoking a cigarette. This is perfect. Let me click a picture
Sure.
and say that this guy who is a hero to millions, he's smoking, which is injurious to health. Now, I own this picture because it's I have a right to it.
Hmm.
Again, the question would be like, did I follow him somewhere? Even if I've taken a picture, that does not make it mine automatically. What are the rules around it? Because many times people think if they have shot something on a phone, they have a right to it. And it comes to the biggest thing that happens is artist images when they go to art galleries or when they see murals in public.
Hmm.
And it's clearly written that it is not for publication. So if you shoot it also, it doesn't belong to you.
Right.
So again, going back to the Shah Rukh Khan issue, I don't know if he's allowed to share that or not. If it's something, if he's peeping through his hotel room door, then he has a right to privacy over there.
Hmm.
Then that is something which is totally not allowed. If he's just
Okay.
walking by and see him do it, then
Yeah, I
then it
think the
depends.
same thing happened with us for the Girl Next Door podcast. So every time we have announced a disclaimer and a notice on our platform that any guest who comes on our podcast, we have the right to the recordings and we have the right to these videos and everything. The guest doesn't hold any right to those videos, so you cannot
Correct.
use it on any other platform without
Yes.
taking consent from us.
Yes.
If you're doing so, we can come to you and tell you that you have violated the copyright.
Right.
And I didn't know this before. Like when I started, I didn't know that this is
Okay.
something which I have to put in place.
Right.
And I have to make sure that the guests do not come and tell me tomorrow that, you never, why did you, shoot me and put it on social media?
Yes.
Because I don't have a written consent from that.
Right.
So having the disclaimer out, so you are saying that basically you have to make sure that you are calling these things out and you're putting
Yeah.
it out in the public and telling people that this is what is going to happen.
Yes.
Please make sure that you are following the guidelines.
You have to, yes, because going back, to at one of my previous places of work, this mega Bollywood star, his company reached out to, the copyright team, and he asked that, I was on the terrace shooting for a dance song, and somebody from, meters away, somebody shot that, on their cell phone, and they published it and take it down. And we're like, we are not going to, because you were on an open set. Nowhere it was written. You were in full public display for, as far as I could see. So, versus, one another actor came and it was a closed set now. Set was closed to public. People could only go leaving their devices behind to see. And there somebody sneaked in and they took a shot of the actor dancing. Now, here it's a copyright case that, the actors company would stand to win. So, we took the images and the videos down, because here it was made clear. But when you are out in the open, for example, and you have not made, this notice, you have not provided, this disclaimer has not been given, and it's a wide open space, then there is no rule against, that somebody far off cannot just shoot you and
Got
put
it.
that picture.
Got it. But in the closed space, like say in this on the social media platform, everybody puts everything, right? And I have seen tons of videos and images of public celebrities or public images who are there in the world being shot, and then their images and videos going viral on social media through different accounts. Uh, but I've never seen a case happening against them. Like it's mostly the social media company that takes care of it and removes it.
They do. So it depends upon, again, mostly the teams, the media companies, the it could be, for example, a movie studio. They will reach out to that company that this is where it's being published, and we have a case against it. This should not be published for so and so reasons that we have in place, and you have to take it down. And then usually the team that works towards handling these complaints, they take it down.
Okay, got it.
But
Got it.
sometimes, it's a case between two big companies, and one says, I have the rights and licenses to do that. And then they have to go to the court route, but which, happens in smaller circumstances.
The landscape of regulation is changing, and it's constantly changing and evolving, and there are new rules and regulations coming in place. The older ones are being modified. How do you keep up with all of these of this changing landscape? Like how do you make sure that you are aware of all of these things happening, and what do you do to educate yourself and others?
So, with like in US and like for example GDPR, when we talk about data privacy, they whenever a change is made, or in the data privacy laws and regulations, all these publications come out. So whatever your field is that you have specialized in, one of the job is that to keep on researching regularly.
Right.
Subscribe to, for example, I subscribe to different news channels. The IAPP, the International Association of Privacy Professionals. I'm a member of that, So I make sure that I'm subscribed, I'm keeping up, I'm seeing what all changes are taking place, whether, a bill has been passed into law or not yet, how I can apply to, my workspace. So it's, again, um, just educating yourself through these various channels and keeping up, also talking and communicating. So sometimes you might not know a lot of things, but there are other professionals who are working in this field who are keeping up in a lot better manner than you can. So it's also helpful, to be in touch with these professions, see what they are saying. So it's not just one way. It's not just, okay, I'll read about it, but also to learn where it's being implemented, how it's being implemented, who are the individuals who are doing an amazing job towards working, and then see what they have to say. So it's from all sides that you have to keep working. It's constant work, I would say.
Thank you so much, Pariuda. These were some really great information that
You're
you
welcome.
shared. And but before we close it out, I have a couple of questions for you to just end this segment.
Okay.
And the first question is, what is that one piece of legal advice you would give everybody to ignore? Like, what is that one legal advice you would ask everyone to ignore?
One size fits all. Seriously. And it's everywhere, right? One size does not fit all. You have a legal problem, talk to a legal specialist, talk to an attorney, talk to somebody who knows. Because there will be people who would come and tell you that, hey, you know what? We faced exactly the same thing, and this is what happened. So the same thing would happen to you. Do not listen to those people. And also, people come to me for advice often. You have to remember, like, if you break a bone in your leg, you would go to a orthopedic
Right.
doctor. You would not go to a neurosurgeon. So remember, when you're seeking help, whom you're approaching. Even in legal field, find the right kind of lawyer. If you're not able to, then ask another lawyer as to, don't ask, hey, give me this legal advice. They will not. And sometimes they are over enthusiastic, and they might, and it might be wrong. They shouldn't, but they might.
Yeah.
So always, find out first of all that the problem you're facing, what kind of legal help is needed. Sometimes the legal help is not needed at all. It's another matter altogether, though it might sound legal.
Yeah.
So, in that case, also be aware of these things.
And being aware and going to the right person is what you're
Exactly,
saying.
right channel. Yes,
Yeah.
for sure. Like hypothetically, somebody, or not hypothetically, but a random example. Once somebody asked me about this immigration documents or something, and which had nothing to do about their visa interview. And I'm like, you have to call the embassy.
Hmm.
Even an immigration attorney might not be able to help you
Hmm.
as to what documents you need for this interview. They might be able to help you, but you don't need one. Just call the embassy. So sometimes we think, oh my God, we need a lawyer, but oh my God, maybe you do not.
Yeah, and maybe understanding that a lawyer also has different specialization. Like
Yes.
an immigration lawyer can advise you on immigration services, but might not be able to advise you on intellectual property rights.
Right.
So being understand this when you're reaching out to an advocate or an attorney, they can give you a direction, but they might not give you the solution.
Exactly. And one thing I would add to this is that when the word lawyer comes into mind, especially in USA, people think, okay, it's going to cost a lot of money.
Hmm.
But that's not always the case.
Hmm.
Two things. First of all, if you have a very grave legal matter, it's okay to spend a little bit and get the right kind of advice. Secondly, it's not always the case that you have to spend right away. There are channels, there are offices, there are lawyers that would provide you one free consultation for 15 minutes to
Hmm.
tell you whether you need legal help also or not. So keep in mind, lawyer does not automatically means money, and that should not be the reason for you to not seek the right kind of legal help.
Right, right. And going to the, I mean, this 15-minute or 30-minute consultation is actually provided by most of the lawyers.
Yes.
So it's very important that you, use this option, consultation option, because it's going to give you a clear direction into what path you should be taking and how you should be, how you can reach your goal, whatever you're trying to achieve
Yes.
through that legal advice. Last question around from you is what would you like to say our audience, like who are listening to us right now, as a lawyer? Like what is one advice you would want to give to our audience as a lawyer and as a woman who has been balancing her life so really so well, like, and who has made so many career shifts? What would you like to tell to our audience?
So, as a lawyer, I would say that every lawyer is not a shark and they are not out there to get you,
Yes.
but to help you.
Yes.
So, there is sometimes, not always, but this negative connotation that goes along with being an attorney. So, I would say reach out for help. It's there.
Mhm.
And there are amazing, brilliant lawyers out there who are right there willing to help you in every way you need. And as a woman, I would say, um, stand up, be on your 2 feet. And it not only applies to financial independence, but your independence as a human being. Do what you like, but for that, communicate, and communicate. Be sure of what you want, and communicate to the world around you in whatever way you can. Because unless you speak it up, nobody is going to guess or come up to you that, hey, this is what we think you might need. No, you know what you need. You have to speak up.
Yes, such wise words, Peruda. Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much. Thank you so much for sharing your incredible journey with us. Thank you for sharing so many important legal topics with us. Thank you for talking about those topics and making us all aware about those
You're
topics. Thank
welcome.
you so much for coming to our show and
It's a pleasure.
sharing your wisdom. What do you think about The Girl Next Door?
I think it's amazing. It's going to go places. It's already going places. And I think everybody should be a part of it. So if you haven't subscribed, please do and share and watch.
And be our guest. Like, if you have something to share,
Yes.
be our guest. Talk about your journey. Talk about if there is a specific topic. Do come and talk to us. We would love to have you here because we are here to share stories, celebrate life with all the trailblazers around us. And this is your host, Neha Kashyap Thakur, signing with our attorney Faruda Kothari on this episode of The Girl Next Door, जहां हम बातें करते हैं दिल से.
Dil tak.
Keep inspiring, keep dreaming, and live your life. Thank you.